Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. You hear us? Are you online? This is New York. OHR calling. Can you hear us? If somebody could just type in the, okay, perfect. Helena, okay, excellent, you can hear us. So welcome everybody on behalf of the Disabilities and the Staff Union to this webinar on disability awareness. My name is Mari Pesonen. I work as the program management officer in the diversity and outreach team of OHR. And I'm here with colleagues from OHR and the Staff Union, and with our guest speakers who will introduce themselves. But maybe the OHR team can, and the Staff Union colleagues can say who they are, so everybody online knows who's present.
Hi everyone, I guess the sound is better now because they were saying that the sound is a little bit patchy. I hope this is better now. Can you confirm? Okay, perfect. My name is Ceylan Çizmeli. I'm working in the OHR on the diversity and inclusion, supporting Mari. And here we have colleagues from Staff Union. Sarah?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited about the webinar. I'm sitting in with Patricia and the leadership. Thank you so much to the UNFC and OHR and the mayor's office.
So this is really in an effort to engage all of you, all of our staff and workforce in the UN, all of us globally as well. So we're very excited to partner with the Staff Union and bring this opportunity for you to learn about disability awareness. So just a few ground rules before we start. So could you please ensure that all of your microphones are muted throughout? There's a chat box option. So if you have any issues with related to technology, for example, you can just type them in. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll have questions and answers session. So you can also raise any questions in terms of the presentation. Any questions you may have, you can just type them in there. We'll have about an hour for this webinar. The presentation part will be, I think, 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have a good amount of time for questions and answers. And this will be recorded and posted later on the HR portal. So those are just a couple of issues. Just very, very briefly, as a way of background, you all know that the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy was launched by the Secretary General in June 19, and this gives a policy and accountability framework for the entire UN system to work on disability inclusion. And us in OHR, our focus is obviously on employment and on enhancing staff capacities in this regard. So we want to really create a diverse, inclusive workplace where and that they can perform to their full potential. So we want to build capacities. We want to make sure that everybody knows how to engage with a colleague who may have a disability. Maybe they already have done so, but they would like to just to learn best practices and just understand any issues that are involved. Or there might be some colleagues who've never worked with anybody with a disability, so this is a completely new area to many of us. So we're so grateful to have Martha here today with us to give us the basics on disability etiquettes and disability awareness. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Martha and her team.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're very grateful for this opportunity. I'm Martha Jackson. I am the Assistant Commissioner at the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. We like to refer to ourselves as MOPD. I actually came on board about 5 years ago, specifically to help create an employment initiative for New Yorkers with disabilities. Today, I'm joined by 3 members of the MOPD team, and I'll let them introduce themselves now, beginning with Tara.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tara Seta. I'm the Business Outreach Manager for MOPD's Employment Initiative, NYC at Work. I specifically take the lead on connecting students and transitioning adults to internship opportunities. I'm passing it off to my colleague, Arthur.
I'm Arthur Jacobs. I'm the housing coordinator. I work with constituents as well as other agencies in the city on their housing policies, ensuring that people with disabilities have access to accessible and affordable housing.
My name is Tony, and I am the ASO Direct Project.
I think somebody might be swinging.
Sorry. My name is Tony Woodard. I am the ASO Direct Project Supervisor at MOPD. I focus on the deaf or hard of hearing community to make sure that they get the city resources that they need without any communication barriers. So what they can do is they can call MOPD through what's called a video phone. So if they need help with housing, transportation, employment, they can call us and we'll have ASL person on the other end to communicate with them in their native language.
So if I may just take a moment and give a brief overview of the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, so you're familiar with who we are and what we do. It was created in 1972 as Office of the Handicap, so you see we've come a long way. It has had multiple leaders and visions, but primarily we serve as the liaison between city agencies, city services, and New Yorkers with disabilities. We are continually growing. When I started a little over 5 years ago, there were 9 individuals working in MOPD. Currently, we are at 26 with an additional 7 we hope to come on in 2020. And we're all working very diligently on making sure that we achieve our commissioner's mission of making New York City the most accessible city in the world. And what greater place to have this conversation than here at the UN. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of history as to why the disability etiquette and awareness training exists. It is a direct reaction and result of the business community asking for help. People do want a diverse and inclusive workforce, but oftentimes disability is left out of this conversation. And so when businesses are looking to truly diversify their workforce, they really don't have one place that they can go to where they can talk about the issues, have it done in a respectful and safe environment, and have access to people that can help them create that talent pipeline, and based on the needs of their businesses, help create a truly diverse and inclusive workforce. So we're here today to talk about disability etiquette and awareness. This is an overview, and we're happy to begin. One of the first things that I think it's important for everyone to know is there are different models of disability. The medical model of disability views disability as a problem that belongs to the disabled individual. It's not seen as an issue to concern anyone other than the individual affected. We don't like this model. So, next slide, please. The social model of disability draws on the idea that it's society that disables people through designing everything to meet the needs of the majority of people who are not disabled. There is a recognition within the social model. There's a great deal that society can do to reduce and ultimately remove some of those disabling barriers, and that this task is the responsibility of society overall rather than just the individual with a disability. And it's the social model that we support at MOPD. So in New York City, here is our universe. We have approximately 916,200 and I'm struggling, but 11% of the population who have disclosed as being a person with a disability. We believe that that number is far greater. Disclosure is always a huge individual for people with disabilities, and they choose not to disclose for a variety of reasons. You can see that ambulatory disabilities take the lead at about 554,000, cognitive at 335. I can't see the vision, about 200,000. And so one of the things that we have focused on in order to address all the needs of our constituents is the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities is focusing on 7 specific areas: transportation, housing, health and wellness, education, financial empowerment, access to all city services and to all the things in New York City, and employment. It is the employment initiative that is driving our signature initiative at MOPD, and it is called NYC at Work. So I think one of the first things that businesses have told us is help us to learn to say the right thing. Always, always put the person first. Say person with a disability rather than disabled person. Say people with disabilities. For specific disabilities, say a person who uses a wheelchair or a person who has cerebral palsy or other disability. But if you're not sure what words to use, and this is going to be throughout the theme throughout this presentation, is simply ask. Here are some terms that we really urge you to avoid. They are very outdated in the community. And number one is handicapped. As you might recall, I did say that this office started out as Office of the Handicapped. That word is no longer acceptable in the community. Crippled, retarded, crazy, special needs, which I'll go back to in a moment, wheelchair bound. People who use wheelchairs are not bound by their wheelchairs, but rather it provides them the freedom to be able to live an independent life. A victim or someone who suffers from their disability is really a judgment call and is totally unnecessary. Physically challenged, differently abled, visually or hearing impaired, we prefer to use a person with a hearing or visual disability. And if I can just go back to a moment for special needs. While we work primarily with adults and their families with disabilities, we understand that families oftentimes refer to their children as a child with special needs. We respect that, and we certainly don't want to change the family's perception. But as we look at people becoming adults, special needs should just become an individual's needs, and they should not be special, simply accommodations or adjustments to an independent life. So here are the basics. Number one, don't assume everyone with a disability needs assistance. Always ask before you help, and ask first how you can help. Don't assume. And if the person says no, they mean no. Don't keep asking or just help anyway, because a person with a disability knows what they need, and if they need help, they can ask for it. The other thing is to think about access to accessible restrooms. This all matters in terms of having a basic and accessible environment. So always speak directly to the person with a disability, not to their companion or to their interpreter. Today at our office, Tony is actually with us, and we have an interpreter in our office. We speak directly to Tony, and the interpreter is there strictly to communicate what we have told or are speaking to Tony about. Also, please refrain from asking personal questions. That's really no one's business. Do not assume someone does not have a disability just because you cannot see it. And I think especially in this world with mental health, learning disabilities, neurodiversity, oftentimes people assume that the person does not have a disability. That's not the way that we like to approach things. We don't assume. Be mindful also when scheduling events and meetings. First of all, ask, number one, is this location easy to get to? Can everybody get in? Can everyone use the restrooms? Can everyone use the office or the cafeteria? Is the meeting space accessible including the bathrooms. And that's really crucial for people when they're doing their checklist. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tara, who's our business engagement coordinator, to talk about people who use wheelchairs and other mobility disabilities.
Good morning, everyone, again. My name, to remind you, is Tara. I'm a wheelchair user. 7 years ago, I broke my neck in a diving accident. So I'm here to give you the expertise on people who use wheelchairs. A person's wheelchair is a part of their personal space. I like to consider my wheelchair my legs, my shoes, my hands. It's my everyday means to get around. And I like to say, you know, if I don't hold your hands across the street, or if I don't help you put your jeans on in the morning, then, you know, just respect my space and my wheelchair and trust that I can, you know, move around independently. If you have not been asked to assist someone, pushing or touching their mobility device is incredibly inappropriate. And do not move a person's crutch, cane, or other mobility device if it's in your way. Instead, ask them to do so they know in which orientation they need to maneuver around when going to use their own mobility device. Next slide, please. When talking to a person who uses a wheelchair, just gauge the length of the conversation that you're having. If it's just over the course of a couple of seconds, it's not necessary to run around trying to find a chair to sit eye to eye. But if the conversation is going on for more than a couple of minutes, it's totally appropriate to grab a seat to get more comfortable speaking to a person who uses a wheelchair. Next slide. Beware of reach limits. I'm sorry. Sure. Okay. Beware of reach limits. Place items within an accessible grasp. Beware of desk heights and chair positions, because nothing is more awkward than typing over a computer keyboard if your legs don't fit underneath. And I understand, as a person who's worked in many office environments, many school environments, that not everything can be on level, but if you just place the necessities of an office within accessible grasp, it makes your staff with who are wheelchair users an easier way to navigate their office space. Next slide. Keep accessibility accessible. And I know this seems like common sense, but if I can tell you my everyday routine of having to call a new location, if they have an accessible entrance, is it unlocked? Do I have to call somebody out to bring a ramp? It just doesn't make any sense. If you have an accessible entrance, keep it accessible. That way I can and other wheelchair users can occupy your space just like our able-bodied constituents. Okay, I'm passing this over to my colleague, Arthur.
Hello, everybody. One of the major themes of this presentation is, as I'm sure you've noticed, is to not make assumptions. So we're going to start off with a couple archetypes of people who are blind or low vision. You'll notice a person using a cane and a person using a guide dog. These are just two archetypes. Not everybody uses a cane or a dog who is blind or low vision. So don't make assumptions. Next slide. All right, so here's some facts about blindness and blind people. First is blindness has a wide variety or wide range of how it affects people. Is that the right slide?
It got jumped. Yeah, somebody's looking over. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so blindness has a wide range of how it affects people. Actually, one fun fact is that most blind people actually do have some vision. Also, our hearing isn't better because we're blind. We just rely on it more. We pay more attention to it. And the biggest barriers for a person who is blind is access to information and society's low expectations. Next slide. So interacting with a person who is blind. First, when you see a blind person on the street or in your office, you don't have to call attention to them. You don't have to make a big scene. A quick story, a friend of mine who's also blind, he works at our office as well. He's walking down the street heading to a restaurant to meet some friends, and he knows he's getting close, so he stops some people and he asks them, hey, is the Outback Steakhouse the next door? And before they get a chance to answer him, he hears a woman behind him yelling, wait, I'm a nurse, wait. And he's like, oh, wow, something's happening. Let me step to the side and get out of the way, kind of like an ambulance on the road, And he's waiting there, and she's like, wait, I'm a nurse, wait. And she comes up, and he's expecting her to pass him, and she stops and grabs him by the arm and goes, okay, I'm here, I can help you. And he's like, well, actually, I'm okay. I don't need any help. So, you don't need to make a scene. You don't have to make a big deal. This actually goes for anybody with a disability. I'm not just blind people. To begin an interaction, you'll just want to announce yourself, get their attention by announcing yourself or introducing yourself. And there are two ways that you can guide a blind person. The first is with verbal directions, and the second is physical guidance, and we're going to get more into detail with that. Next. All right. So human guide. So you'll want to find out which side of the person they want you to be on. Some people want you to be on the opposite side of their cane or dog, and others may want to switch hands and have you on their dominant side. It'll be up to them, but you'll just want to ask which side. And just as an aside, if you are just walking with a person who's blind, you'll want to walk on the opposite side of whatever mobility device they're using. So if they're holding their cane in their left hand, you'll want to walk on their right side. If they're using their guide dog in their left arm, you'll want to be on their right side. You'll want to keep your arm straight down to your side, not crooked out, at an angle with your elbow away from your body, because this helps the person who you're guiding to better feel your movements as you walk and turn and maneuver through crowds. If your elbow is out, they have a harder time feeling how your body is moving through the space. And if you come to a narrow space, you'll want to just change the position of your arm and put your hand behind your back and out a little bit so they can just slide down and grab your wrist and walk behind you. If there are steps coming up, you'll just want to announce that they're coming up and then which direction they're going. So we're coming up to some stairs going down. We're coming up to some stairs going up. And when you show somebody a seat, you'll just want to put their hand not only on the seat, the bottom of the chair, but also on the back of the chair so that they have an orientation of the way that the chair is facing. Next slide. And if you're going to give verbal directions, you'll want to think of this. Well, first off, a lot of blind people prefer to get verbal directions rather than being guided. Everybody has a different level of independence, and you'll want to respect that, even if it seems like they may need additional assistance. They're the best arbiter of how much assistance they need. So some people will want verbal guidance. You'll want to just think of yourself as a GPS, a human GPS. So, you want to avoid vague language like over there or this way. Imagine if your GPS in the car said, just go over there. You'd be like, So you'll want to start with left, right, straight ahead, behind you, very concrete directions. And here's an example of a way to give directions to somebody. Walk to the end of the street, turn left, then walk 2 blocks, and the building should be on your left. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. Just a little bit of background. I'm deaf. I was born deaf. It's genetic. I'm part of the largest Black deaf family in the United States. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, and sisters. Everyone on my mom's side of the family is deaf. So it's a part of who I am, and I wouldn't wish for anything else. So here are some deaf or hard of hearing facts. Not every deaf person can communicate the same. Obviously, I'm deaf. I can speak. Not everyone can speak. So just keep that in mind. That there are some who prefers to use American Sign Language. There are some who prefers to gesture. There are some who can't speak. So just keep in mind that there are different types of deaf people. Those who identify as deaf with a capital D consider themselves members of the deaf culture, which has its own language, arts, humor, and customs. So myself, I consider myself part of the deaf culture. So capital D for me, it's like I said, it's who I am. It's part of my daily life. There's also those who identify with a lowercase d. Those tend to usually be maybe they became deaf at a later age, or they're just not a part of the deaf culture in terms of using American Sign Language or using some of the accessibility resources that the deaf community use. Members of the deaf community have tendencies of being very blunt and direct. What I mean by that is a lot of times a deaf person from the deaf community may not have any filter. They may say, how much money do you make? That's not something you would normally ask, a person that. But members of the deaf community, they have that tendency of just being very blunt and direct. So just keep that in mind. For a majority of the deaf people, English is not their first language. I think that's really important. So when you're interacting with the deaf person, just keep in mind that English is not the first language. ASL is. ASL is its own language, its own customs. So if you're going to interact with a deaf or hard of hearing person, the best way to go is to write it down on a piece of paper or use your phone, type out whatever it is that you're trying to say. But also keep it short and sweet. Interacting with those who are deaf. When you need to get a deaf person's attention, flick the lights if you're in the room. That's just one way. Or lightly tap the shoulders. If you see two deaf people interacting with each other, you may see they have their own tendencies of getting each other's attention. Some of the ways with that is you may see them bang on the table. You may see stomping the floors. Those are some of the things where you can kind of feel the vibration, and we can feel it. Find out if the person prefers sign language, gesturing, writing, or speaking. If you're going to speak, speak clearly, but not necessarily louder. No need to shout. It's obviously not going to help with that person hear more. So, again, like I mentioned earlier, the best way to go is just write it down on a piece of paper or use your phone. Communicate where there's enough light. I think that's really important. If you're in a room or wherever you are and you're communicating with a deaf person, just make sure there's enough light in the room. It's light. If you're not familiar with sign language, simply communicate by writing or using your phone to type whatever it is that you're trying to say. Keep it short and to the point. Why? English is not the first language. I think it's really important just to keep that in mind. When using an ASL interpreter, maintain eye contact with the person who is deaf and communicate the same way you do with your hearing peers. A lot of times when a hearing person is communicating with a deaf person, they may look at the interpreter and say, tell him that I said, or tell her that I said so and so. Just maintain eye contact with the deaf person and just communicate like you do with your hearing peers. Again, the next one, show patience. I think it's really important. Just be patient and use your phone or write out whatever it is that you're trying to say on a piece of paper. That's like.
So this is Martha again, and we're going to just talk a little bit about other disabilities, including those with speech disabilities. Again, it's really important that you give the person your full attention. Do not interrupt or try to finish their sentences. Tony just mentioned how important it is to be patient when communicating with someone who is deaf. It's also very, very important to have patience for someone with a speech disability. If you don't understand what they are saying, tell them, and then ask if they can repeat themselves or repeat in a different way, or offer to have them write or text. Very similar to what Tony has just expressed is crucial with people from the deaf community. It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. People with learning disabilities. These disabilities interfere with a person's ability to receive, express, or process information. But every person with a learning disability is different. Some examples are dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, also nonverbal learning, and not every learning disability is visible. There has been a great deal of research being done into learning disabilities, having technology accessible for people with learning disabilities and alternative ways to get the information across is so crucial and actually makes life easier for everyone.
Fun fact, if anyone uses autocorrect when you're typing a document or on your phone, originally designed for a person with a learning disability, but universal design means it's universally useful for all people.
Thanks, Tara.
We just had a question in the chat box. What is ADD, ADHD?
Adult, attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Thank you.
So developmental disabilities, it's really a lifelong group of conditions due to an impairment and physical learning, language, or behavior. Developmental disabilities include cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, and autism. So when speaking to a person on the autism spectrum, this is very, very important. There's a lot of focus right now on neurodiversity and autism, and oftentimes people are not quite sure, what do I do? What do I say? Keep it simple. Speak to the person in clear and simple sentences. Ask specific questions in order to elicit very accurate responses. Repeat the question in a different way to verify the response. Be direct when starting and ending a conversation. People on the spectrum, including my own son, life is very black and white. There's very little gray. So being direct is very important. It's also important to know that sometimes jokes, humor, can be misunderstood. Also, it's really important to make sure that you are very specific. I'll give a little example. We had an intern in our office who was on the autism spectrum. Actually, it's the intern that did a lot of the illustrations for our presentation. And one of the people that he was working with said, "Okay, great, have a good afternoon." But about 5:30, he came back because he was told, "I'll see you later." And later today, to him, was later in the day. So just a little tip, be very specific. Okay. For intellectual disabilities, this actually presents before the age of 18, and there are different levels of intellectual disabilities. Like every disability, there's mild, there's moderate, severe, and profound. And how you interact with that individual and communicate with that individual will oftentimes reflect the level of intellectual disability The intellectual disabilities include Down syndrome, also fetal alcohol syndrome, and Fragile X syndrome, which is a genetic condition causing intellectual disabilities. So, mental health disability. I think that this is one of the disabilities that is most understood. So let me just tell you that in New York City alone, 79% of New Yorkers with disabilities are jobless. That's right. 79% of New Yorkers with disabilities are out of the workforce. The number one disability that is being disclosed on college campuses, whether it's the city, state, or private universities, is mental health. It's not physical, it's not learning disability, it is mental health. And it's really important that we understand, because this is a disability, this is a condition that many of us live with. Mental illness is a term that describes a broad range of mental and emotional conditions that can affect mood, thinking, and behavior. And many people with mental health concerns, many people have mental health concerns from time to time. I mean, you can think about a time when you have been extremely stressed out, feeling enormously anxious, or if you had a situation in your life that has caused you great difficulties. Depression is the most normal reaction, and it's not something to be afraid of. But mental health concern becomes a mental illness when ongoing signs and symptoms cause frequent stress, but mostly affect your ability to function. The most common forms of mental illness are anxiety disorders, mood disorders, and schizophrenia. In New York City, the First Lady of New York City actually addressed mental health issues in our city and created a program called Thrive, THRIVE, in order to address and to educate New York City employees on mental health first aid. I know that thousands of individuals have been touched by this training, but we are also in a city where mental health is living out on our streets, is not being served in a timely way. And so our city is taking huge efforts to address this issue, far beyond training our own city agencies, is to really educate our entire city community.
Martha, we have a question from Cornelia before we proceed. She says, differently abled was a good or bad thing. Could you please clarify?
So thank you for the question. The disability community believes that differently abled sets aside. People are able to do things, perhaps they do them differently, but that does not mean that they are differently abled. We want to be able to lead with a person first and person with a disability. It's how someone is able to go through their daily lives to be able to achieve the same kind of result that their non-disabled peers was. And I'll take it out to the rest of the team to see if they'd like to respond to that as well.
Sure. Terms like differently abled, we like to explain it as it feels condescending in a way that it's like you're trying to sidestep around the fact that we have disabilities. And I wake up in a wheelchair every single day. I know how I navigate the world. I may not be doing it like you, but that doesn't take away from the fact that I have a disability. And across the disability community, it's people with disabilities oftentimes have a lot of pride in having independence. So there's no reason to sidestep around the fact that I have a disability. I have a disability and I'm living with it and I'm moving on with my life.
So I think we're towards the end
Sure.
of the presentation part. I don't know if your team, Martha, has anything else to add to what was discussed, or should we just take questions from?
Oh, we can go right with
participants?
questions,
Yeah.
sure.
So we've already got a few questions in, so we'll try to address them, and you can just, everybody online, you can just type them in and we'll address them. The first one is
Hi.
hi.
Oh.
Aiko,
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Hello. Oh, hi. Good evening from Bangkok, Thailand. I am a disability focal point at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asian Pacific. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I really appreciate the fact that the mayor city government has this kind of office, which I hope to be spread out as a good practice throughout Asian Pacific. So in that appreciative spirit, I have a couple of questions. Number one, out of the total 29 or nearly 30 staff members that you had in your office, what percentage of you are persons with disabilities? I already get the sense that you have a reasonable percentage of representative of persons with different disabilities, but I just want to know the percentage. That's question number one.
Mm-hmm. So I'd say about 40% of our office are individuals with disabilities, both those that are visible and those that are not, including veterans, including people with other physical disabilities, including quadriplegia, including cerebral palsy. I myself am a person with a disability. I grew up with a learning disability and did not know it until I was an adult. We have folks, I think that, we have people that have, I'm going to say 40%. For the folks that are coming, well, honestly, it's really important that our office really represents the community that we serve. And also, our office needs to be informed by people who live every day with disabilities so that we best understand what our role and our mission can be and how they impact. And that's one of the reasons why the Commissioner, Victor Khaleesi, really wanted to begin an employment initiative, because when you have people in your workforce that have disabilities, you have a very, very inclusive workforce. The product is different. There's people that come in with different thinking, with new ideas about how to use technology, how to communicate with their own population. And another thing that's really been amazing for us is that for so long, people with disabilities were always in silos. So the deaf community, the blind community, people with physical disabilities, they were all in silos. Now, in our office and through the work that we're doing, collaboration and inclusivity and intersectionality is really, we have to live it in order to be able to understand it.
Yes, thank you very much. That sounds fantastic. Can I just ask you just one more question?
Sure.
I just, in terms of intersectionality, I would like to know what your office does in disaster preparedness or community level drilling or just to make sure the inclusivity for in that area.
So in terms of emergency preparedness, I'm not sure of the second piece, but the first part of the question. So I'll be totally honest with you. When we had Hurricane Sandy a number of years ago, people with disabilities had serious issues. It was difficult to communicate. Oftentimes they were not able to leave the places where they were living, and the community sued the city, and that was a good thing, because out of that came the need for our office to have Office of Emergency Management staff within our office. As I mentioned earlier, we are the liaison between the community and city agencies, and we have representatives in our office from Office of Emergency Management, from the Taxi and Limousine Commission, from law, from the Department of Telecommunications and Technology. What am I missing? I think that's probably and we are actually we have a task force. We actually work with the police department in terms of accessible communication, in terms of how do we reach people, creating text to 911, having ASL Direct, so people who are deaf have access to city services, and and of course 311, which allows communication from all of our constituents.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There were a few more questions, so let me quickly. Okay, one colleague was asking, how should we deal with little people? How should we call them?
With little people?
Little people.
There you go.
Little people.
That's it. You named it. We actually have someone in our office who is a little person, and that's how he loves to be referred. That's the perfect way to call.
Okay. Just no dwarf, so
No.
it would be helpful to spell out those things that we should be avoiding as well.
Right.
Okay.
In terms of interacting with little people, I see that that was the first part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
So our coworker, John, who is a person, who is a little person, tells the story about when he was born, he was quite a surprise. First of all, he was supposed to be named Catherine Rose. And secondly, he was a little person, born a little person without any little person history in his family at all. And so his mother was not quite sure what to do, but she decided that John needed to be brought up as any other child, independent, doing things for himself, and challenging him every day to make sure that that whatever he needed, whatever he had to attain, whatever he even had to physically reach, he had to find a way to do it. And kudos to his mom, because he's one of the most independent people that we've come across. So that's really important, especially children, to be able to give them independence and to really strive with them to make sure that they are included and that they have the ability to lead an independent life in terms of access to education and employment. The one thing that we believe is that through the power and dignity of work, all things are possible. So children really, they're the ones that are going to make the difference in this world, and how we treat our children and how we expose them to the reality of life, including disability. There's no greater gift that you can give.
Another question is that earlier you mentioned intellectual disabilities are categorized into moderate and severe in terms of diagnostic, and our colleague is asking, isn't that using the medical model of disability? Would it be more appropriate to refer to support requirements instead?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Would it be more appropriate to refer to support requirements?
I think the medical model defines the intellectual disabilities, but what we are speaking here in terms of dealing with intellectual disabilities is providing enabling environment and support systems.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
the description we had was, that's true, was a medical description of what an intellectual disability is.
Mm-hmm.
In all honesty, we did edit out the presentation, and it didn't include some of the supports or accommodations due to the time limit. But what I can do is I can send the full version back over to our friends here at the UN, and they'll be able to send out the full version of this PowerPoint for you.
Thank you so much. I think this question is for you, Tony. An interpreter at the UN was very interested in ASL. He's wondering if there are different types of sign language depending on the country, like Canadian French Sign Language, or is there one common language?
Yes, there are different types of sign language in different countries. There's British, there's Korean, there's Russian, Mexican. And there's different types of sign language. It's not all the same different countries. Here in America, obviously, is ASL, American Sign Language. But yes, there are different types of sign language depending on other countries.
I think we have a question.
Nope. I have a comment, actually. I've done research on this in the UN context. For example, in our
I'm not sure it's in. Oh, online.
Yeah, that's one. Can I?
Mhm. Okay,
Okay.
okay, it should, no, that's okay.
Sorry, I'm be a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, in the context of the UN, we've done some research on this. There seems to be three separate, widely used English sign language, and that's only one language, and we have 6 official. So one would be American Sign, then there's International Sign, and then there's British Sign. And so it's something I think that in the UN context, we have a lot of work to do to be able to provide interpretation, but we are working towards that.
There's an interesting question. Shirin says my kids are 6 and 4 years old, and I try to train them on the nice way to deal with people with disabilities, such as not commenting or asking many questions. At the same time, I do not want them to be stressed when dealing with people with disabilities. Do you have any guidance? Because schools do not address this a lot.
Sure. This is Tara. I have a master's degree in school counseling, actually, and I was an intern at a high school in Brooklyn who has the largest population of students with disability, about 720 students, and so I saw firsthand how kids interacted with kids, right? And even, so I was in a high school one year, and I was in an elementary school 2 other years. And I see with young people that it doesn't really matter what your disability is because they see you as a person. But my suggestion to you is just teach them, touching wheelchairs and mobility devices are inappropriate. Yes, asking personal questions is also inappropriate, but it's not inappropriate to explain what disabilities are and explain that that everybody has different abilities, and just because one person operates one way doesn't mean that the next person is going to operate the same way. So exposing a child to differences and allowing them to be okay with differences, I think would be the first step. And I'm going to pass it off to Martha.
So I think that's really a great question, especially when you're talking about children who are so young. I think I'll just give you an example. One of our business partners reached out. Her daughter has epilepsy, and while it's usually contained, so to speak, she had an episode in school in front of all of her friends. This left her really embarrassed, and the family's unsure to how to react. For me, disability rights are human rights and civil rights, and what we need to be able to do is incorporate them into the curriculum in our educational system, no matter what country that you're in. At some point, it is very likely that everybody in this world will have a disability, and being afraid of it, being afraid to talk about it, or not being able to understand in conversations like this, this is what's going to change culture and change systems. So I applaud you for speaking to your children in an honest way. But I think the most important thing you can teach them is that everyone is different. And if anyone needs any kind of assistance, simply let them ask. Never assume because someone looks or speaks or sees or thinks a little bit differently than you, that they're not part of the society, and working together, we can actually make real change happen. So if we could incorporate disability rights into the educational system throughout the world, in fact, a lot of these conversations would no longer be necessary. But I do applaud you for having those conversations with your children at such an early age. Is there 1 second? I'm going to tell you a story I don't think I've ever told anybody in my office. When I was 4 years old, I was at home. I grew up in Massachusetts. It was a big day for us. A piano was arriving. And I was very excited. My mother was in the back of the house at the kitchen. The doorbell rang, and I ran to open it. And there was a man standing there who had dark glasses on and a white cane. Now, I'd never seen a person who was blind before, and I don't know why I knew that person was blind. But I ran to the back of the house and I said, "Ma, somebody's here and he's blind." And she said, "It's the piano tuner. He's blind. He's not deaf, Martha." And I think from that moment on, I never assumed anymore. I was 4 years old, the same age as one of your children. And just being honest really kind of put me on the right path.
Empathy goes a really long way, and I've seen that in the school system, and I've seen that with adults as well. The earlier you can try to teach empathy, or implement empathy, or use empathy to explain differences, the better off humans in general will be.
Great. I think we're out of time now, unfortunately. Thank you, everybody, for joining us online. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, the entire team. On behalf of OHR and the staff union, I just want to remind or inform everybody that the International Day of Persons with Disabilities is coming up in 2 weeks' time on 3rd of December. There will be events happening in headquarters in New York that we will also stream on the web. So keep your watch out on this space. There will be more information on that through the staff union and also on ISEEK. So maybe just to close, I don't know if Patricia from the staff union, who's just recently joined us here, maybe you can just say the final words.
Yeah, thank you very much for Marta and her team and the colleagues here in OHRM and Marta Helena also, who is a lead advocate on this issue to make this happening. And we as a staff union, we are very happy to also be part of it and advocating and working with the colleagues and then, helping also the UM family to be part of this cause. Thank you very much for coming.
I see a lot of questions, and so if there's a way to forward them to me.
We will share the questions.
Right, and we'll answer, and you can,
And we
very
will
good.
compile them in a document
Thank
and
you.
then share with the participants.
Great.
Yes, and with the staff union, OHR has been thinking of maybe continuing this kind of webinar. So we appreciate all your comments and feedback. There's clearly a need for this space. So we want to bring in experts like Marta and her team and share all the knowledge and information. So thank you for everybody. Thank you everybody for participating. And I think that's a sign that we have to now sign off. Thank you.